Hello, everybody. We are live with a great virtual panel full of middle grade fantasy. I am very, very honored to be talking to so many great authors. We've got Maya Leonard and Sam Sedgman, the authors of The Highland Falcon Thief. We've got Jess Redman, the author of Quintessence. We've got Adriana Cuevas, the author of The Total Eclipse of Nestor Lopez. And we've got Gilbert Ford, the author of The Mysterious Messenger. So thanks for joining us today, everybody. How's everyone?
Good.
Great.
Having us.
That's good. So before we get too into it, let's just do some quick introductions. So how about we start with Maya and Sam?
Hi, my name's Maya, and I'm the co-author of this book, The Highland Falcon Thief, with Sam. It is my fourth book published in America. I have a trilogy of books called the Battle of the Beatles trilogy that came out on Scholastic a couple of years ago. I wrote a science fiction trilogy about amazing beetles who were enhanced by DNA, and that was my first foray into middle grade in America, which was very exciting. And this series, because it is the first in the series, I've written with my lovely co-author Sam, who should now introduce himself.
Hello, I'm Sam Sedman. This is my first book ever that I have co-authored with the wonderful Maya. Maya and I used to work together at the National Theatre in London. Maya used to be my boss, and we got on very well, so well that we decided to write, which is something I've loved ever since I was a boy. And it's a mystery story as well, something else that I've loved ever since I was very little.
Great, thank you. Gilbert, how about you tell us about yourself?
Sure. I've been illustrating and writing books since about 2007. I've illustrated a lot of middle grade book covers and interiors, and then I've illustrated and written picture books. I've written 2 nonfiction picture books and 1 fiction picture book. And this is my debut middle grade novel that I wrote, The Mysterious Messenger. I have the audiobook, so there you go.
I love audiobooks, so that's exciting. Adriana, how about you?
All right. Hi, I'm Adriana Cuevas. I am the author of The Total Eclipse of Nestor Lopez. I grew up in Miami, Florida. I'm Cuban American, so I pour a whole bunch of that into my stories. I taught Spanish and ESL for 16 years before deciding to write. And so this is my debut novel. And then I have another novel that will be coming out next fall that's a historical fiction that I wrote about my dad immigrating to the US from Cuba. So that's where I'm at.
Nice. Jess, how about you?
So I'm Jess Redman. I have one other book last summer that came out, The Miraculous. That was my debut. And then Quintessence that came out in July. And it's the story of a girl who has to save a star that falls into her backyard. And then I have a book coming out next May. So right now I'm mostly writing. Before this, I used to be a therapist. So I do like stories of all kinds, whether they're coming from people sitting in an armchair across from me or out of my own brain. So excited to.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you so much for everyone being here from wherever you guys are. So my first question, and all of these questions are going to be for the panel, so we'll kind of do a round robin and let everyone start off. My first question is, why middle grade as a genre? You know, it's such a great formative time for readers, and that's a lot of responsibility to take on, I think. So why did you guys choose to write as middle grade authors? And we'll start with Jess.
Okay. Well, I originally, I've always wanted to write, but at first, when I was in my younger 20s, I took myself very seriously, and I thought that I would write really serious, like adult literary fiction books, and I thought that's what I was going to do. And then I actually, I had my first child, and I was just thinking so much about childhood and fun things, and just the way that the world is unfolding before my child's eyes and at the same time my eyes. So I started just playing around with some middle grade stories, and it was like I just clicked on like a switch inside of my own creativity, and that was kind of it for me. The middle grade times, the middle grade years are when I read the most. And so I'm really connected to those stories, and it was really easy for me to channel that voice and that type of imaginative experience. So
do your kids read your books now?
My oldest, she wants to read them. So I have started reading a little bit more fun and lighter, and so I'm excited to read her those.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Adriana, what about you?
Well, like you said, I taught before I became an author, and throughout my teaching career, I taught kindergarten through 12th grade at some point, and I found that the middle grade age student was my absolute favorite student to teach. Because they could just be absolutely ridiculous and silly with you, but at the same time, they were really getting a growing sense of justice and the world and their place in it. And it was, to me as a middle grade writer, it's so much fun to balance those two, to deal with some serious, heavy issues while at the same time getting to shove as many fart jokes into your stories as you possibly can. And they just like eat that sort of thing up, that I just love that you can still be a child and yet you can still feel like you can have an impact on the world. So I just love writing for this age. And I have a 12-year-old son, and so it makes it really easy.
Oh, that's perfect.
What's the right ratio of fart jokes to like serious content?
You have to look at your word count, and there's a particular spreadsheet that you can develop that you have to make sure that the curve is correct. It's there's a fine line.
Mm-hmm.
That's for the masterclass series.
Exactly.
Gil, how about you?
So I was illustrating a bunch of middle grade book covers, and I'm probably one of the only illustrators that actually read the manuscripts. But I sort of fell in love with middle grade just from reading the novels that were sent to me to illustrate. And it got to the point where if I got the manuscript, I'd take the whole weekend off and read it. And I ended up going to grad school at Vermont College of Fine Arts for the Writing for Children and Young Adult program. And the teachers had encouraged me to write a middle grade novel. And to me, that was just very scary, but I tried it. And it ended up being something that was easier to write than a picture book for me, just because picture books are so concise, and I don't know, they're different things altogether. So that was kind of where I got into middle grade. And yeah, I actually like reading middle grade more than literary fiction these days, just because the character usually like gets through it, and I don't know, he solves the problems. The whole thing ends up turning out good in the end, whereas in literary fiction, I sometimes get a little bit down by the result.
You can't have enough happy ending stories right now. Like this, just everyone needs some good content.
Yeah.
Read lit for sure.
Yeah. Bea and Sam, how about you guys?
Well, I have written 5 or 6 middle grade books now, and several picture books as well. So if I go back to the first middle grade book that I wrote, which is the first book that I ever wrote, I actually thought I was writing for grown-ups. And when I was told by publishers that it was for children, I was very confused because I thought it was very grown up, and they were like, but the protagonist is a child. And I was like, well, the protagonist has to be a child because at this age, my protagonist was 13, they are open-minded, and they haven't made up their minds about stuff, so they analyze what they see as they encounter it, and anyone older has already made decisions and their personality is formed, and I wanted an open-minded protagonist. And they said, well, yes, all of this is true, but this makes it middle grade. And they were like, but there's a lot of poo in the book, and you don't get a lot of poo in adult books, and there's these two characters that like are constantly hating on each other, very Roald Dahl style, and that's also very childish. And I realized that my narrative voice, the voice inside my own actual head that I write with, is about 12, and the things that I thought were hilarious, and I am a grown-up, I put into the book, and it turns out I'm a massive child. So that's why I ended up being a middle grade author, because internally I have a middle grade psyche. But I also think that if you ask most people, like, name your 5 favorite books, there will be at least 1 or 2 books from their childhood in that list. And I think those books are formative in people's characters, personalities, and memories. And there is a real challenge in writing something that is joyous, informative, exciting, and great about middle grade, a challenge that I don't see in literary fiction. Or, you know, mostly that's about being very clever or knowing lots of words. So I'm not sure I'll ever stop writing middle. I love writing middle grade. So that's why I write middle grade.
And just to follow up on what Maya said, I, like Jess, I've always written, but in my 20s, I thought I wanted to write much more I wanted to write serious, important, political plays and novels and things like that. And I'd never considered writing middle grade until Maya suggested that we write this book together. And in doing it, I just discovered it was all about connecting with who I was as a child. And kind of through doing that, I've realized that many of the things you like and enjoy and care most about as an adult are the things that you liked, enjoyed, and cared most about when you were about 10 years old. And a lot of those things we kind of decide that we should put away as adults, that they're silly or not important. But actually, they're some of the great joys of my life, reconnecting with the things that I enjoyed and liked when I was 10 years old. And having cast aside the idea of writing middle grade as something childish, I've been delighted to discover that it's one of the most exciting and important things I can do with my adult life.
Mm-hmm.
May I have to say, whoever told you that poo doesn't belong in adult fiction is very wrong. James Joyce wrote about poo all the time. So
yes, this is true.
You'll be delighted to hear that there's plenty of poo in this book as well.
Yes.
Related to the plot, important plot points hinge on poo.
I thought you were going to say that there's plenty of James Joyce in it, and I was going to be like, I missed that in it. Subtle allusions. I'd say I pretty recently went back and read my favorite middle grade series again, which was a Star Wars Jedi Apprentice series. It told the story of Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan becoming Padawan and Master. And it really was, it still felt relevant to me. Like, I still connected to it, and I wanted to keep reading. And it wasn't just nostalgia.
Mm-hmm.
But that kind of leads me to my next question. What kind of elements did you guys want to make sure you included as you developed your books? And how do your books build off or respond to the ones that you read as a child? Just a little bit harder of a question. So Adriana, do you want to kick us off?
For me, I always want to make sure, and it's not something that's intentional. I think as authors, we write what we know, and I know Cuban American culture, so that's always going to be in my books. But I always actually want to make a point in my stories of including quite a bit of Spanish that's not translated directly, because one, that's how I speak. That's how I grew up hearing. Miami's unofficial language is Spanglish, and you just go about your day hearing it. But I also think it's a very important skill for students to develop, figuring out what something means by context. So the teacher in me couldn't resist doing that either. So, but I think in terms of elements, yes, I always want to include my culture. In terms of things that I responded to that I put, is that what you're asking? Like, as a child when I was reading?
I guess, were there things that as you read, you were like, man, I don't see this in these books, and I really wish I could see X, Y, or Z?
Oh, Well, yeah, I never saw myself in books growing up at all. It wasn't until I was in college and I read a lot of like Isabel Allende, and then I got into some other Cuban American authors. But yeah, I didn't really have any main characters I related to. I was a huge horror fan, and I was obsessed with Edgar Allan Poe growing up. And so I like to include horror elements that I usually am asked to scale back for middle grade readers. But I have, growing up, I was obsessed with this anthology of Edgar Allan Poe, and it's from the 1980s, so the illustrations are amazing because everyone has like feathered hair, and it's hilarious. But as a child, I read that over and over, probably at an age when I should not have been reading Edgar Allan Poe. So I really I like to include maybe some darker elements, but I also like it when your main characters can overcome those elements too. But a good scare is always fun.
Yeah, horror is not something I ever read as a kid or really saw out there, except for Goosebumps. But I avoided those.
Yeah, I never read Goosebumps, and then I always say that the one series that I thought was a horror series was the Babysitter's Club, because I hated the thought of taking care of small children, so I never wanted to read those books. Like, that was R.L. Stine, like those books. So yeah.
We're gonna have to revisit that book series again with a fresh lens.
I think there's a very lucrative crossover series to be had there.
With horror babysitting.
Yeah.
Like a 1980s slasher.
Yeah.
Like that movie, The Stranger Calls.
What was that, Jess?
There were a few like horror style Babysitter's Club books, actually.
Oh.
Sort of weird fringe special ones.
The holiday specials.
Yes, the holiday specials. I remember one with a creepy little girl in a nightgown standing on a roof. I don't remember all the details, but
nice.
I'll have to ask my partner Jenny about it.
Yeah.
She would know. All right, Gilbert, how about you?
Okay, so I was reading books like Louis Archer and Roald Dahl, stuff like that. So that was sort of what I took going into writing the stories. Let's see, so incorporating elements of writing for the middle grade series, this middle grade book would have been friendships. It's a story about friendship, and then there's a little bit of and then I added psychics and ghosts and everything that I was sort of interested in as an adult, and sort of mixed it up and tried to make it kid friendly, and that's kind of how I put it together. So.
Nice. Sorry, I was on mute. The dogs are barking. Sam and Maya, how about you?
Well, so our book is called The Heinen, Falcon, Thief, and it's set on the last journey of the Royal Steam Train around the United Kingdom. And it's a sort of jewel theft mystery on board a steam train. And really, those are the two things that I loved more than anything when I was younger, with our detective stories and anything involving trains. Maya will perhaps tell you where she originally had the idea for a series about trains come from in a minute, to do with her boys and her kids who have always loved trains. It's something that I've always loved ever since I was little. I grew up with a railway line at the bottom of my garden, and when I heard the sound of a train coming, I would run down the garden like a lunatic and jump up onto the compost heap and wave at the driver as they went past, because sometimes they blow the whistle when you do that, which is very exciting. And I found a great deal of comfort in detective stories and the structure of them, and I found this just pure joy as a child in steam trains and the way trains work, something that I continue to find as an adult. A lot of adults still do as well. And I think it was those combined that combined sense of comfort and joy from the familiar, and the way a detective story, everything works out good in the end in a very satisfying way, were two things that we really wanted to get into the tone of the book. We wanted it to feel like a big hug, really, something really, really wonderful and kind of nostalgic, but very much set in the present day as well. We're quite influenced by Agatha Christie, as you can imagine. Everyone always goes, oh, it's like the Murder on the Orient Express. But one thing I will always tell you about Murder on the Orient Express is that Agatha Christie clearly doesn't really care very much about the train in that book. It just gets stuffed in a snowdrift for the whole time, and it's just a series of locked rooms and people bumbling around. We wanted to get a lot of real life engineering facts in about the way steam trains work, about actual railways in the UK and the way trains actually work and the way they travel. And so a lot of our plot and our clues are all based around that.
It works so much better in the UK, the train. I have to say.
Sometimes. Although
like
our second book in the series is set in America. It's called Kidnap on the California Comet, and it's I went on the amazing California Zephyr from Chicago to San Francisco as research, and that is truly a wonderful, out of this world train that is much better than anything we have in the UK.
I don't know. I took the London to Glasgow, and that was quite the trip as well.
The Caledonian Sleeper.
Yeah.
Was it Sleeper Train? Oh, it's
no, it was the Virgin Bullet train.
Oh, just the day train. Yeah. It's a lovely, the East Coast Main Line is where our book is set, actually. It's a lovely, beautiful railway.
Oh, cool. Sorry,
the mayor must tell you. Yes.
So for me, the way that this series came about is I'd written the Beetle books, and Sam and I, as he said, worked together at the National Theatre, and he asked me what I was going to do next. And I'd had this idea because I have two sons, and both my sons are what they call reluctant readers. They struggle with reading very much, and they really like facts, but they don't like reading fact books. And I was thinking, if only there was a story that like engaged them with the things that they love, and they both loved trains, model railways, actual railways, heritage steam railways. They loved all of that. And I went looking in bookshops for an adventure that took place on a train that might appeal to my sons, that was written at that middle grade level, that didn't have any violence in it, or I've got quite sensitive boys. They don't like guns, and they don't like blood, and they don't like quite a lot of things. And I couldn't find anything. And I thought, I wish there was an adventure series that took place on different trains around the world that would be like, you know, like travel literature for children, that would be exciting, but also engage with the detail of rail. But there are only two really big problems with this idea, which the first one was I don't have a mechanical brain. I don't know anything about trains. And I don't know what kind of adventures I would put on those trains. So I was at an event with Sam. We'd had a few glasses of wine when he was asking me what I was going to do next. And I told him about this dilemma, that I'd had an idea, but it was something that I couldn't do on my own. And then he got very excited because, as you may have gathered, he does like trains a lot, and he knows quite a lot about them too. And he started saying, oh, you could do this and you could do that, and it could be this kind of mystery. And that was when I was like, oh, we should do this together. And I knew we could work together because we'd worked together for 7 or 8 years. But the things that I brought to the project that are from my history of reading, really, and my experience as a writer is around our protagonist, a boy called Harrison. And with my children, I found that a lot of books really revere the literary. So you'll read a lot of books about children who love reading books, which is problematic if your child, like my children, really struggle with reading books. If they read about children who love and enjoy books and they are struggling, they feel like that's not the kind of child they are, and it actually has the effect of pushing them away. So I wanted a book where the literary wasn't revered in the same way. So our protagonist, Harrison, is an artist. He loves to draw. And that's one thing that my boys have always done, is they've told stories through pictures. They will draw comics and they'll tell me the stories, but they really struggle with the written word. And I struggled with the written word when I was young. So our protagonist, Harrison, is an artist. And all the way throughout the book, he does these drawings. This is the footplate of the locomotive. He's drawing everything he sees. And it's only once he gets 2/3 of the way through the adventure that he realizes that in his drawings, he's captured some clues that may help him solve the mystery of who the thief is. And it's through the drawing that he realizes that his special skill is the way he sees the world, that he has a unique eye for capturing moments of truth. And in those moments of truth are the clues. So children who maybe don't find reading that easy, I hope will enjoy this book, because it is rich with illustration, but the protagonist, a lot of the descriptive prose is about how he's drawing, and the illustrations complement that. And that's something that I, mostly for my sons, like this series has been born out of a desire to create something for children like my sons that maybe struggle with reading but love factual detail. So yeah.
That's really great. I'm very impressed by the ability to not only foreshadow a mystery story in words, but also in the drawings. That's so cool. Jess, what about you?
So I am a therapist. I'm not practicing right now, but that's what I did before I started writing, as I'm doing full time right now. But so all of my books so far really do deal quite a lot with emotional issues and sometimes mental health issues. When I was a kid, I was a very intense, pretty emotional kid. I was anxious. I had panic attacks. I was always thinking about things. And so I used to gravitate a lot towards books that had characters who had that level of emotional intensity. So I loved Meg Murray in A Wrinkle in Time. I loved how just off the wall and feeling Harriet and Harriet the Spy was. I just loved books like that. And I loved either fantasy, and then I loved really sort of issue-driven contemporary stories. And so when I first started writing, I started sort of just merging those two worlds. So bringing contemporary issues, emotional issues that kids go through and that are interesting to them, and as well as the fantasy aspect of it. So in The Miraculous, it's more looking at grief and sort of big questions that kids start to ask, and merging that with a witch in the woods and with a magical quest. And then in Quintessence, the main character does have an anxiety disorder. She has panic attacks, and she's moved to a new town. And so the story really follows her journey of coming to understand herself and her mental health issues, making friends, sort of their own issues that they're going through. You know, a lot of times when you're young, you think, I'm the only one who has these problems. I'm the only person who's anxious, or I'm the only person whose family isn't perfect. And so that was important to me to sort of incorporate that. But at the same time, with the fantasy component, because for me, there's so much magic and power in melding those two worlds and putting the magical and the contemporary together. I think you get this extra layer of meaning and this extra like perspective shift when you can see things through that magical lens. I think it's especially powerful for kids to be able to see things in that new way. So I guess that's sort of, for me, and not all my books are going to be, I don't think, have mental health issues specifically, but I think everything that I've written so far and everything that is sort of planned for the future has that melding for me, because that's what I love to read. And I think, you know, I would have benefited so much from having books that had characters who were going through those same issues when I was a kid.
Oh man, I lost my train of thought. Oh no, it's gone. Sorry. I'm gonna move on to our next question. It will come back to me, and I will ask you what I was gonna ask. But Gilbert, tell us, in The Mysterious Messenger, what was your favorite scene to write, and what was the hardest scene?
What was my favorite scene to write, and what was my hardest? Let's see.
If you can do it without spoilers.
Okay, yeah, I'm trying to generalize it a little bit. My favorite, well, I had a couple, but I loved writing about, the story is about a girl who, well, It's about this girl named Maria who lives with her fake psychic mother who cons widows out of their inheritance. But Maria is keeping a big secret from her mom, and that is she can really talk to a ghost named Edward. And one day when her mother was trying to con one of the widows, Edward, the ghost, contacts Maria and sends her on a treasure hunt to find this widow and find treasure in her apartment. So that's sort of where the story kicks off. And in it, she ends up becoming friends with Mrs. Fisher, the widow. And the scenes that I enjoyed writing were the scenes where Maria got to know Mrs. Fisher, the widow, who had a very interesting life in the 50s New York, where she hung out with the beat poets. So there's a little bit of beat movement poetry, abstract expressionist art, and jazz. So I kind of liked including that while she was meeting her and in the scenes in her apartment. The one that was actually sort of the most difficult thing also to write, because I didn't want to put much backstory. Putting backstory in a novel is difficult. So you have to put a little bit in a picture and a little bit over here, and it has to come out in ways that just doesn't sound like an info dump. So that was it was sort of my favorite part, but also the part that I thought was challenging. So there you go.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, the premise of the book sounds so cool, and you really get to dive into some of that history without getting, like I said, bogged down in an info dump. And the idea of a real psychic girl with a fake psychic mom is so cool. And Maya and Sam, what were the hardest scenes for you to write, and which ones brought you the most joy?
Sam, you go.
Well, I was going to say, speaking of not wanting to get mired in info dump, you try writing a technically accurate middle grade book about steam trains and not obsessing over valve pressure and gauge width.
Have people fact checked you, or like?
Oh, all the time. Because people who love trains really love trains, and
That's true.
rightfully so. And everyone loves different things about them. And like for some people, it's the specificity, it's the history, it's the makes and models, it's the numbers, it's the services, it's the lines. There's so many different things. We did an awful lot of research into making sure that everything in our book is technically accurate as possible, with some notable exceptions that we kind of lampshade quite well. One of the most fun bits, actually, I must tell you, was when I was actually here staying with my family, where I am now. They have all my old, I don't know if you have Brio in America. It's a sort of wooden train sets that you kind of put together. There was a bit of the story where the train needed to turn around at Inverness station, which is in the north of Scotland. And I was really worried that this isn't actually possible in real life. So I had to take all my old Brio set out, lay it out on the living room carpet with my dad, and recreate the tracks of Inverness station, which you can all get up online, and then like check that you could actually move the train around them in such a way that because it had to be facing one way or another. This is the level of research that we went to make this book technically accurate without boring you all with it. That said, one of I think the most exciting scenes for me that we managed to put in the book was the scene that Maya actually showed you the illustration for earlier in her earlier question, which is when they are on the footplate of the steam engine, right in the driving seat at the very front, where Harrison, our protagonist, discovers that he loves steam trains for the first time. So they're out on the footplate going at full pelt at 80 miles an hour down the East Coast main line, and the fireman and the engine driver are cooking baked potatoes wrapped in foil on the top of the steam boiler, and they get them down from there, and they pull out a can of baked beans that they've also been bubbling away on top of the boiler as well, and they fry some eggs on a shovel in the furnace, which is all real things that real engine drivers used to do that are just so wonderful, that we knew that we had to put in the book. And it's this wonderful moment where he discovers that he loves steam engines for the first time, and you as a reader really, really understand that love and that wonder that we feel. And the best part of all of it is that it's all based on true things. Maya and I both firmly believe that the best details from real life are much better than anything you could make up. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the most wonderful things that we managed to put in that I think we're both really proud of.
Yes,
I would love an English breakfast right now.
I would totally agree. That's my favorite moment, actually, is on the footplate, because it's just it's something that I, when you write a book, you edit and you read every page 10 times. But every time I read the footplate bit, I just got warm inside. It just makes me glow. So that was also one of my favorite bits. I would say the hardest bit for me, because as you may have guessed, the detail and accuracy and everything, I didn't do that bit. That was Sam. The hardest bit for me is always every book I write, but in particular this one, is the opening. Because if you're writing a detective story, and this is a mystery, that opening, you have to introduce all of the clues. And really, once you've read the book, if you go back and reread it again, you'll know who the thief is in the first few chapters if you read it like with the knowledge. So when you're writing that, you have to seed all of the clues, but then you have to obscure them in a way that doesn't say, hey, I'm obscuring this big clue over here. It's very, we wrote that opening so many times to try and make it so exciting that you would rush through and enjoy reading it and not notice the clues and go for the red herrings. Like that's a balancing act that is quite something. So I think the opening of the book was, for me, the hardest thing, and got rewritten many times.
Yeah, I would imagine that it's quite the balancing act as a mystery writer. Jess, how about you? Favorite scene and toughest scene?
I think my favorite scene, well, my favorite scenes are always at the end, where like everything ties together and you find out all the mysteries and it's very exciting. So I won't share about that scene because that's spoiler territory. My other favorite scene is when Alma goes into the backyard after the star has fallen and she meets the starling for the first time. That was my favorite scene to write, to imagine sort of what the starling was like. The starling is a young star. So what the starling was like, how she had fallen there, how she had gotten there, how Alma feels about meeting her there. And then they go on this sort of chase through the woods where Alma loses the starling. And a lot of the story is about her finding that star and using sort of this ancient alchemy book and astronomy. She has to get the star back into the sky. So that was my favorite part, their initial introduction. And the hardest parts to write, the book did require, even though it's a fantasy story, it did require a lot of research also. So there's a lot of facts about astronomy. There are supernovas that happen up in the sky that produce different results. There's stars being formed in nebula. There's the idea of, how far the next distant star is from us, how long it would take the sun to crash into the earth, all sorts of, those fun topics to explore. So I had to do a lot of math. I had to do a lot of research. And then I got to research also ancient alchemy stuff and medieval alchemy, and reading some old texts and sort of figuring out what they thought and how I could sort of shift it in my story to make it fit this plot. So I did have to do a lot of fact checking. And those scenes were also a little difficult because you want to weave, as with the train information, you want to weave that in a way that's not boring to the reader, in a way that's engaging and exciting. And so that they think, wow, this is a cool area. I want to know more about this. And so I loved doing the research, and I think it comes through in a really fun way. And but it did take some effort. It took a lot of rewriting to make sure that it was going to be fun for readers.
That's awesome. I mean, where to even start with ancient alchemy?
I mean, when you get to put alchemy, I do say this book is like a bunch of my favorite things that I just like put all together. I was like, there's going to be astronomy, and there's going to be supernovas, and there's going to be alchemy. And, it just worked out that I got to do that. So I'm very happy.
Please tell me you've got a big old leather-bound book somewhere in your real house that you've got out of a library or something, and you're looking through spells and stuff.
I did most of it, unfortunately, online. It's a little bit of a letdown, I know. But I did so in the book, there's like a magic telescope, and somebody brought me, it's called a quintoscope. This one cannot see the fifth element, quintessence, but maybe I will make modifications to it. So I did get to get this.
Awesome. Adriana, how about you?
I think for me, the toughest, I guess, part to write with my book. So Nestor Lopez is about a boy who is from a military family. And so his dad is deployed, and he's used to moving around a ton. And so there's a part in the book where Nestor's talking to his mom, and he's saying that, you know, there's always big ceremonies when his dad leaves, and there's always parades when his dad comes back, but nobody ever talks about what happens in the middle, like when his dad is gone. And that's really what the book, it is a fantasy with talking animals, and Nestor can hear the animals, and they're fighting the Tulevieja, but the story really is about the middle and what happens while his dad is gone. And so the toughest part for me to write, because this was based on my own experiences of when my husband was deployed, when we first got married. We realized that by the time of our 4th wedding anniversary, we had probably lived together maybe 11 months. So we spent a lot of time apart due to his deployments. And there's this scene in the book where Nestor's mom answers the front door, and she just has this complete breakdown because at the door she sees 2 people that are in uniform, and she assumes that they're mortuary detail officers that have come to tell her that something has happened to Nestor's dad, and they're actually high school ROTC students selling popcorn. And when I wrote this scene, I thought, this is going to get flagged. My agent or my editor is going to say, this is too unbelievable, this would not happen. And it's like we were saying, where the best details are ones that come from real life. But that actually happened to me when my husband was deployed. I had 2 students come knock on my door in uniform. And I guess you just don't see things accurately when you're in a heightened emotional state. And I just remember blurbing out, "No, thank you," and shutting the door and then just losing it. But so for me, there were a lot of elements in the story that I think were maybe a little bit tough emotionally to write, because I was revisiting that time of when my husband was deployed. I got to ask my husband a million questions about what it was like for him to be deployed, which was actually, even though it was maybe tough for him, it was good for us, because I think veterans tend to sometimes not be too open about their experiences. And so we actually got to talk about a lot of things. But that was probably the toughest part of the book. On a more positive note, the most fun I think I had was with the climax of the story. Many of my students that I liked to write for, like your sons, where they're the reluctant readers, and I loved reading growing up, but the types of books that I liked were fast-paced, you know, very plot-driven. And so for me, it was a lot of fun to write a similar book and to finally get to that climax that I think has a lot of action in it. And I love how all the talking animals come together to assist Nestor against the Tulevieja. And so it was really fun for me. And I think also because since this is my first book, I've realized in retrospect, I was learning how to write a book as I wrote this book. So to finally get to the climax was a really satisfying thing, and to have everything turn out the way I had intended was nice. So yeah.
Nice. Was it hard translating the sort of emotions that you felt about your husband's deployment into that of a younger main character?
Yeah, I mean, because it is different. I didn't have the experience that Nestor had of traveling, or, you know, always having to move all the time. I just was by myself in the same place. But I had a couple of friends who are military parents read the manuscript just to kind of fact check for me, like, did I, because I think the emotions are the same. And so even though the logistics of everything were different, I think the similar emotions are still there.
Nice. All right, let's get to some audience questions. See, first one's for Gilbert. Tiffany, who also went to VCFA, so shout out. I don't know the mascot, if there is one, so I can't properly shout it out, but she asks, do you feel more informed as a writer after attending VCFA and learning all the skills taught there? I think for her, she says it was a little bit overwhelming.
It's a very it's a difficult program, but it's not. I don't know. I enjoyed it. I learned a lot, and then I learned a lot once I got out too. So I think it's a great program if you want to do it. And yeah, there you go. It was overwhelming my first semester, and then I eventually got the hang of it, and then I was fine with it. But it is a lot of work. Okay.
Nice. Jess, did you get any inspiration from Neil Gaiman's Stardust? And how did it feel when you heard about being picked by Owl Crate Jr. with an exclusive cover?
I had one of my reviews. I was so excited when it said reminiscent of Neil Gaiman's Stardust. I was like, I love Stardust. I don't know that I have read Stardust, of course, and I love the book. And there is sort of the idea of the star and the star becoming a real person. So there's that element. So maybe some part of my subconscious sort of, snitched that from him. But other than that, there isn't a lot of crossover necessarily. Although I think that they both sort of share some pieces. But I loved that comparison because it's one of my favorite books. So, and as far as the Owl Crate Jr., that has been one of the highlights of my author career so far. If you don't know, that's like a subscription box, and they sort of built the box with my book. It was called the Elements in Alchemy box. And so I got to have a special map in there. The book does have a map, but they made a special map just for the box, and they did, this is the map, which I absolutely love. I always wanted to have a map in a book, so. And they put all sorts of little things that have to do with astronomy and with alchemy. And then I got to have the box, and I got to open it, and there's a video of me doing it on YouTube, and I'm beside myself thrilled. So that was like peak author goals, subscription box. Who doesn't want that? It was really, really thrilling. So
very cool.
Lucky to have that. Yeah.
Yeah. And then a question for the whole panel, and we've talked about this a little bit. In your research, what did you have to do? Is there anything that you guys haven't talked about, that piece of research that you found that maybe didn't make it into the book that you were like, I wish I could have? Or was there a piece of research that you were so excited to have found? This is open to whoever wants to take it.
Well, I researched a lot of psychics, and I went to a bunch of seances in order to write the story. There were some interesting ones. There was one that I went to that was in the basement of a museum, and what had happened, they had these two mediums that were there that would be like, we're going to list the characters of the ghost, and you're going to claim them as a family member. So she'd be like, I have a lady in here in her 60s, she bakes apple pies, and someone would be, Aunt Marge, and they're like, Aunt Marge says, do this, and it ended up being like basement bingo a little bit with ghosts, but that was probably the most outrageous experience. But yeah, I went from YouTube psychics to museums to all different kinds of things to research it.
Did anyone get anything right about your life?
No, but when you look for it, they don't. But then once or twice, I've actually met somebody that I wasn't looking for, and they got everything right. So it's like, I don't know. I can't tell you whether it's true or not or what.
No answers in your book on that, then?
No.
You're saying. Okay. Anyone else?
I had a research assistant for mine. So there's a ton of, no, it's not anything impressive, trust me. There's a ton of animal trivia in the book, because when Nestor starts at his new school, he joins a quiz bowl team that focuses on biology and zoology. And I put that in the book because my son, when I started writing the book, was absolutely obsessed, and still is, with animal facts. And he used to sit with this massive animal encyclopedia on my bed and just flip through it. Mom, did you know this? Mom, did you know that? And I didn't know any of it. And so now, I had all of these awesome animal facts, but there were only so many questions that got asked for each quiz bowl scene that's in the book. And even now my son will find new facts for me, like, Mom, look at this is incredible. I'm like, no, it's too late, we can't put it in the book. So I need to like make a special maybe edition where there's extra animal facts or something, because it was just a lot of fun to find just the most ridiculous, typically involving vomit and excrement. Those are the best animal facts. But yeah, it was a lot of fun to find all those different things, and we're still finding them. So I'm gonna have to rewrite the book with updated animal facts.
Gotta tap into that STEM market.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
Well, I actually had, when I was writing this book, there's quite a few early versions, and some of them had the magic turned up quite a bit more. And so there is an alchemist who was a medieval alchemist called Paracelsus, who actually figures into the story, but he had this idea that every element also had its corresponding what's called an elemental, which is like a sort of magical creature. So there were sort of like mermaids in the water. There were sylphs, which are like air sprites. There were salamanders that were in the fire. And so in early versions of the book, I incorporated a lot of his ideas, and those creatures were in the story. And I ended up taking them out because they sort of became their own story, and they took up a lot of words and a lot of space explaining them and exploring them. But if people are interested, you should definitely do more research into alchemy and the elements, because there's a lot of fascinating and very weird stuff out there that you can learn.
That there is.
Yes.
For us, it was really, I was the research assistant on the bed shouting out facts about trains to Maya, who was deciding whether or not to put them in. I remember that we did, one of the first things that we did together when we weren't really sure if we could write a book together, was I basically took Maya on a blind date with trains. I dragged her to York, to the York Railway Museum, which is this fantastic place here in England, where they have loads of amazing old and new trains in a giant hangar, and you can go and look around them, and you can go and stand on the footplate.
And I have to just fess up at this point, I was dreading it, and I thought it was going to be the dullest day of my life.
But that was it. We really kind of were doing it as an experiment to see, so Maya, do you like trains? And we had this lovely moment where we went, there is a very famous steam engine called the Mallard, which is, it's a kind of engine called an A4 Pacific, which is the same model as the Heinen Falcon in our book, the steam engine that pulls the Royal Train. And it's the fastest steam locomotive on the planet. And the actual engine is there at the York Railway Museum, and you can go up and stand on the footplate. And I think it was there when we were in the footplate, kind of looking around it, being told all about it and all these amazing facts about it. That's what we learned about baked potatoes. That's what we learned about the eggs. And a very nice museum attendant called Amy answered all of our questions, and we liked her so much we named a character after her. But I think that's where I think I persuaded Maya that trains were cool.
Yeah. It took some persuading as well, because I wasn't sure to begin with whether we could work together, or I kind of consider myself a good boredom barometer, because I have quite a short attention span. So Sam would start talking about trains, and at some point I'd stop listening, and the bit I heard usually gets in the book, because I can't take in too much information, because I just don't have a mechanical brain, and a lot to do with engines and boilers and all that kind of stuff. Even though I've read it quite a lot of times, it doesn't go in, but I understand the cool stuff. I understand, like, if there's a massive screw mechanism that turns and brings the coal from the tender into the boiler, I'm like, oh, that's cool, I can picture that. But anything that's much more complicated, I'm not capable. As I said, narrative voice of a 12-year-old in here. So yeah, I think I filter out the more complex researchy details.
You guys struck a really good balance between the two of you.
Thank you.
All right, so we're almost to noon Pacific. We have just a couple more questions from online. Are you guys okay hanging around a little bit over?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And then we'll end it, I promise. So how do you guys approach character flaws and character journeys when writing about children? This is open to whoever wants to jump in.
Character flaws, do you mean the protagonist's character flaws or just character flaws generally?
In side characters or in the main character.
I think it's always really important that your protagonist has a very a defined arc. Like if your protagonist is the same at the end as they were at the beginning, you don't have an adventure. The adventure has to change them in a number of ways. They have to grow, and you know, it's that combination of action forming character and choices, you know, that are made, whether they're good or bad, or the right or possibly wrong choices, and the consequence of those choices building that character. If you're weaving all of that together, you're going to end up with a really involving, like, realistic feeling story. So I think it's hugely important to do that. I think particularly in a mystery like we've written, we obviously have some more flat two-dimensional cast members who, you know, may seem flawed or not seem flawed, and who don't evolve or change, or even, well, there is a little bit of justice that we meter out, but not so much that interested in the development of other characters. But for the protagonist, absolutely, that's one of the most essential things that you're doing, I think, when you're telling a story.
One of the things that I remember most vividly from our experience of writing the book together was we have a scene where Hal, our protagonist, and a friend he makes along the way, Lenny, who's stowed away on the Royal Train, who they team up to solve the mystery together. They have to climb in. They have to sort of climb outside the train and climb into another compartment to investigate and find clues. And as we were writing it, we sort of realised that Harrison wasn't the kind of boy that would be okay doing this. And we'd planned that they both climb out, and they climb in, they look around, they find the clues. It's really great. And we realized that he's not going to make it. She's going to get in, and that's fine. And he's going to struggle and not be able to. And that was, I think normally you'd think, well, it's an adventure story, like the main character has to be up for everything. They have to be able to do everything that's asked of them. And I think one of the important decisions that we made about our character is that he wouldn't be like that. He wouldn't be always effortlessly the gung-ho hero. His main skill is being an artist and drawing and being observational, and that's much more his speed. And so finding the friction within that, when we put him in different situations, was something that really helped us define him as we went through writing the book together.
Mm-hmm. I think that's good. When you were talking about character flaws, I think, like you were saying, Mai, to have a good character arc, obviously our characters have to have flaws, but I think the challenge for us as people who are writing children characters is to not to approach those flaws in a condescending way, because then it's really obvious that you are an adult writing about a child. Mm-hmm. So I think you have to make sure that when you present your characters' flaws, one, they're realistic, but two, I kind of try to approach mine as something that was just more of a universal experience. Like for Nestor, I guess you could say flaw, or the thing that he's learned, is he doesn't trust people, and he doesn't really make friends all that easily, or he's scared to make friends because he's had to move around so much. And I felt like, even though he does have a character arc in this story, it was really important to me that he not solve all his problems by the end, because to me that wasn't realistic. His dad is probably going to come home and then have to leave again. He's still going to be dealing with these. So I didn't want his whole emotional journey to be tied up in a neat bow, because I think too, sometimes that's the temptation of adults writing children, is to solve all their problems for them, or to show that, like, it's prescriptive, like this is how you would deal with that situation. And I don't feel like that's very authentic or respectful for our readers. So it's kind of a fine line where, yes, you want to make them real characters and give them problems, but then you have to be very conscious about how you approach solving those issues.
Yeah, and I think, both of my books so far have had some fairly more emotionally intense aspects to them, but I think that's something that kids are going through. So I think a lot of times people who don't read middle grade or who don't interact with younger readers a lot, maybe aren't fully aware of everything that they're going through and all the complexity of their internal emotional life and all the things that they're thinking about already and feeling already and dealing with already. And so I really love, as middle grade authors, we get to tap into that, and we get to show readers maybe sometimes areas and issues that have not even been shown to them yet. I think middle grade literature has come a long way since the 80s and 90s. And, when I was reading books as a kid, we're able to show so much more diversity of experience and life, and sort of show that some of the things that maybe are perceived as flaws really aren't flaws, really are just part of who people are and part of the way that they live their lives. And in this book, Quintessence, there is a lot of, each character does have sort of these strengths, and then they all also have areas where they need the assistance of other people. They need help, they need their community, they need their friends. And so that's sort of at the core of the story. So I think that, and it's weird, I don't want to say that's the message of the book, because it's not really like a message story, and that always makes it sound like really like, oh, that's not the way I want to present it. But that is sort of a core theme of the story, is that we are all connected, and that there are things that might feel flawed about us, but that really are just part of our personality and part of who we are, and that we can, learn how to live with those things and to get help and ask for help, and that those are good parts of growing up. That all made sense.
Gilbert, did you want to chime in with anything, or we can ask her?
I think everyone did a great job explaining it. I wasn't conscious of trying to give my characters flaws, maybe the bad guys, Madame Dustine and Mr. Fox, but my main character, Maria, if there was any kind of flaw, it would have been shyness, because she had to overcome that. And that was the only flaw I gave her. There you go.
Thank you. All right, so
more succinct than I put it. That's very good.
So the last question is just, what's next from you guys? Anybody working on anything new that we should expect? I feel like there's at least one follow-up to one of these books.
Yeah, well, the Highland Falcon Thief is the first in a series. And so in England this week, the second book that we talked about, which is set on the California Zephyr, but except it's the California Comet, because we've made a slightly fictional version, comes out in the UK this week. So that will be out in America, I think in February. And we've already written the third one, which is set in South Africa, which is a murder on the Safari Star. And that comes out in England next February. So I think in America, we're like 6 months behind, but we're putting out 2 books a year of this series. And they're all adventures on trains. Obviously, that's the name of the series. So yeah, at the moment, we're working very hard and doing a lot of train journeys. Well, not for the last few months, but doing a lot of train research for those books.
Very cool.
Yes. And I think actually the thing we haven't said is that in our books, Hal goes on all these amazing adventures with his uncle Nat, who is a travel journalist who travels all over the world writing about trains. And Hal's very lucky enough to go with him on all these adventures. He's a very brave 11-year-old, but he's not flying all over the world by himself, jumping on all these random trains. One of the nice things for us to do has been write this wonderful relationship between Hal and his uncle. So yes, they will. Over the series, it'll be more a series about travel writing and exploring the world together, which I think is something really exciting for kids who can't. A lot of kids kind of can't travel and see the world freely in the way that a lot of adults can. If you want to go and see the world, you can, until recently, hop on a plane. But yes, it's nice to be able to tell stories all around the world and show different parts of the world through these books.
Nice. Gilbert, how about you?
So I turned in the rough draft of a standalone book called The Cutting Edge. And I can't really talk much about it because my editor hasn't, I haven't gotten an editorial letter. But I will say that it takes place in Astoria, Queens. And it involves, there are these knife sharpeners in New York where they drive a van and then they sharpen your knives. And they're from the 1940s, but for whatever reason, they've been there forever. So it has something to do with that, something to do with private investigation, and something to do with a kidnapping. So there you go.
Oh. Sounds cool. Right. Sounds dangerous.
That's all I can say.
Adriana, what about you?
So my second book will come out fall of next year, and it's called Cuba in My Pocket. And then, like I said, it's a historical fiction. So I kind of, I really love contemporary fantasy, but this was a story that I just felt like I had to tell because I wanted to honor my dad's experience. So like I said, it's about his immigration to the US from Cuba in the 1960s. So the first half of the book takes place in Cuba, and then the last half is in Miami and in the Keys. And so it was really fun to write, especially to do that shift between contemporary fantasy and then historical fiction. But the manuscript I'm working on now is back to contemporary fantasy because I feel like I really love that, and it's full of ghosts and Cuba, and those are my wheelhouses. So
push a little bit more horror in there each time, right?
Oh, heck yeah. I tried to convince my dad to let me tell his story in a fantasy way. Like, would he be comfortable talking to the ghost of Fidel Castro? But, he was like, I don't think so. That might be a bit too much. So it's just straight historical fiction.
Oh, very cool. Jess?
I have my next middle grade book comes out in May, and it's called The Adventure Is Now. And it's about a boy who spends the summer with his environmentalist researcher uncle on a remote island in the southern Atlantic. And on the island, he finds a field guide full of fairly fantastical plants and animals, and a series of clues that will lead to a treasure that will save the island from some unnamed peril. So it is a really exciting book. It's a quest book. It's a journey through the jungle. There are, river creatures with 100 tentacles and things that eat the kids and then spew them out, and all sorts of fun. So I'm really excited about that one. It's going to have like an illustrated field guide in the back and different clues for readers to solve. So that's coming in May.
Exciting.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much to everyone on the Zoom and to everyone who was watching. If you want to buy any of these books, and I encourage you to buy all of these books because they're amazing, you can get them through Mysterious Galaxy. There's a buy link over on one of these sides. And you have until a week after this panel, so till next Sunday, to get personalized book plates from the authors, which is a really great treat as well. Not as easy as it is in normal times to get signatures. So we really appreciate you guys doing that for us. And keep an eye out for all the upcoming books. And hopefully when things get back to normal, we can have you at Mysterious Galaxy in person. We would really look forward to that. So we're going to sign off for now. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. Bye.
Bye.